On the eighth month, I made my first sale, and then the sales started to come in, thick and fast, such that by the end of the year, we had my review, and they said, "Look, we were really worried about your strategy, but you've been vindicated. You were right, we were wrong, and we'd like to make you CEO."
It's time! Work, play, evolve!
I want to connect the listeners to the best of the best. Welcome to the Evolved Broker Podcast. I'm your host, Pat Costello, the co-founder and principal at Evolve MGA. Our mission for the podcast is to bring the insurance industry the best of the best. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing one of the most powerful people in the world of insurance operations. My guest today is the CEO of ResourcePro, Dan Epstein. When he joined, they had about 25 employees, $125K in revenue, and 4 clients. Today, they have more than 6,000 employees, over $100 million in revenue, and they provide outsourcing solutions to hundreds of insurance firms across the country. Dan may be one of my most interesting guests to date. He grew up in England, served in the Israeli army, got his MBA from Columbia, became a stand-up comedian, and eventually discovered ReSourcePro and grew it to become the premier operations provider in the insurance industry. We discussed growing up in the UK, some wild military stories, his time as a stand-up comedian, ReSourcePro, and his advice for scaling a massive company. Today's podcast is sponsored by First Insurance Funding. First is a leading premium finance company in insurance and is known throughout the industry for their personalized service and quote flexibility. If you're tired of sending quote requests for smaller premiums to multiple companies, not leaving enough time to negotiate larger opportunities, then choose First as your primary financing source and experience the First difference today. Without further ado, here is Dan Epstein. Dan, welcome to the Evolved Broker Podcast.
Thank you so much, Pat. It's great to be with you.
Very excited to have you on. I think there's not enough people in the industry that know your story and know exactly what you do. So I have a few goals for our conversation today. I want to, number one, personally, I want to get to know you on a better level, on a deeper level. I want the audience to get to know you personally. I want to talk about your story, where you grew up, your military experience, your time in New York, how you became the CEO of ReSourcePro. And I also would love to discuss your outlook on the insurance world, ReSourcePro at the moment, getting through COVID. And so if that's okay with you, I would love to start at the beginning.
My pleasure. Anywhere that works.
All right, cool. So can you talk about your childhood and where you grew up?
Sure. I was born in Wales, in a city called Cardiff, a provincial town in the UK. I grew up, first 10 years of my life, lived there. At that point, my parents thought it'd be a good idea for me to go to boarding school. And so it was a kind of a unique opportunity. I like to describe it as Hogwarts without the magic for any Harry Potter fans, but it was kind of a similar experience. I would, from about the age of 11, I took the train across the UK, and then picked up a cab, and then from there went to a school just near Oxford, in the English countryside on the River Thames. It was pretty idyllic environment. For me, it was kind of a transformational in that you grow up in a small provincial town and you think you're never going to leave, and then suddenly you're thrust into a completely different environment with people from totally different backgrounds, a lot of international students. My parents made the mistake of sending me to summer camp just before sleepaway camp, and so I get to boarding school and I really couldn't tell the difference, boys and girls, and getting up to mischief, and not that kind of mischief, but it was a fantastic experience, and just really got me thinking that the world is kind of a place that's open and free and full of opportunity.
In what years were you at that boarding school? Like how old were you?
Okay, so you're really going to date me now. So I was born in 1970. I'm 50 years old, and so early 80s. We're talking about Michael Jackson, Duran Duran. Those they were big at the time.
I love it. And so that was pre-high school, correct? Or did that go through high school?
So that was that. So in England, high school starts at 11.
Okay.
And you go, basically 7 years through. And so I did basically most of my high school at that school, that boarding school near Oxford. I finished off my high school in Manchester. Mm-hmm. The last few years, my family had moved up there. And so wrapped up there.
And it sounds like when you wrapped up high school in Manchester, academics weren't the biggest priority. Was that the case?
I'm not sure if it's that they weren't the biggest priority or I just wasn't very good at them. Suffice it to say, I didn't do terribly well in my end of high school exams. Didn't know what I wanted to study at university. I ended up applying to 5 universities to study law. I was rejected from all 5 universities. And then we called around any university that would take me. And I got into a program to study politics and history, which turned out to be a fantastic blessing. I shouldn't say a blessing in disguise. It was a unique opportunity because it was a course that gave me 3 periods of extended work experience in the course of my university degree. So I spent 6 months working in Israel. I spent 6 months working in East Africa and Tanzania. And then I spent 6 months living in Washington, D.C. and working on Capitol Hill. So that was really kind of a unique experience for a young student. And coming out of that, I went from being the worst student who barely got through his first year of university to graduating top of my year. And then being able to do a master's degree at the London School of Economics.
That's amazing. And I think my own story, I have some parallels with not being the most focused student in high school, not necessarily knowing what I wanted to do. And then for me, I went to Loyola Marymount University in LA, and I was in a travel program where we went to Germany and we got to go visit. It was an international travel program within Germany. So we got to go to different cities across Europe, going to Scotland, going to Paris, going to Prague, etc. So that's super cool. So did you know it was a travel program going into it for the University of Brunel, correct?
Yes. Look, I would have taken anything at that time, but it just turned out to be a fantastic program and a great university. And so I really lucked out. But I agree with you that those travel programs are fantastic. I often say the best form of education is travel, particularly if you can do an extended stay in a place, because you really get to experience the culture. You learn, to the extent you can learn a new language, that's mind expanding. You think differently. You see how other people see the world, and I think it gives you a different kind of humility about life and learning that I think stands you in good stead.
And that seems to be a major theme of your life, is traveling to new countries. And if we're continuing along the story here, in 94, you moved to Israel and you became a citizen. And just like you mentioned, you started learning the language, you started learning Hebrew. Tell me about the motivation to move there and what it was like when you got there.
Yeah, so my family, I've got many family members who live there. We've been traveling there from a very young age. At the time, I just finished my master's degree in international relations, and Israel at that time had just signed a peace treaty with Jordan and the Oslo Accords with the Palestinian Authority. And so it just seemed like kind of a brave new world to be part of. And I was looking for adventure, being young and a little naive. And so it just, was something that I wanted to do. And so I moved there. I spent about 6 months studying the language, and then was drafted into the military. And I then realized that 6 months of learning the language was definitely not enough to be thrust into that kind of environment. But I made do with it.
And I don't know if everybody in the U.S. knows this, but if you're an Israeli citizen, you are required to join the military. Is that correct?
Yes, everybody joins the military, men and women. Mm-hmm. And it's there's a broad spectrum of kinds of jobs that you could have. I felt that it was important to join a combat unit because I felt that as living there as a citizen, I should do my part, and other people shouldn't be taking risks on my behalf, but I should be stepping up as well. So I joined a tank unit.
And Dan, we were talking prior to this. You have two epic military stories when you were serving. Can you tell first the story when you had to jump out of the convoy? And then secondly, can you tell the story of the almost friendly fire incident?
Well, I think these are interesting stories, and they kind of picked up on things that I thought about, or things that became more important later on in life. So the first story you're referring to, I ended up doing 2 tours of duty in Lebanon. And the first time that I was going in, our job was basically to defend the border and prevent enemy soldiers from basically firing missiles into northern Israel. And so we had a base that was several kilometers inside of the security zone within Lebanon. So to get there, you had to go in a convoy to get to your base. So they put the tank onto a truck, and they put us into a special kind of a vehicle where you basically enter it from the back, and then is armor plating on the sides. And they said, look, if the convoy stops, it means you're under attack. And so we went through various training exercises, what to do if that happens. And we felt fairly confident. We knew what to do going in. And when you're in that situation, you always want to be the last person out of the truck, so that you put your fellow soldier first. So I'm the last person to get off. I'm right in there, and we're going through, and the convoy stops. And so immediately we assume we're under attack. And we jump out, pile out of the back, and I jump out, assume my position, and sink about 6 inches deep into mud. It was November. It had been pouring with rain. It was muddy, and so this to me was kind of the fog of war story. Like you can train, you can plan, you think you know what you're going to do, and then you end up face down. Your gun, everything about you completely smothered in mud. And thank God we weren't under attack. That was kind of a false alarm.
Thank God.
I learned from that, it's important to prepare, but also look before you leap.
That's awesome. And then this next story, I think really speaks to some future moments in your career when we're talking about process-driven operational solutions. So if you wouldn't mind going into the tank story, that'd be awesome.
So this it's definitely, to me, kind of a process, the importance of process story. We would be out, each night basically looking to just make sure that there was no infiltration into the sector. And on one occasion, I was listening to the comm and heard a fellow tank say, "Hey, we see some very suspicious individuals. We think that they're carrying weapons. We think we need to take action, which basically meant potentially engaging them. And the message from kind of the command post was, do not engage. And a conversation, I know from a friend who I had in the tank, a conversation then ensued. We're going to miss the opportunity. They're going to get through. They're going to fire a missile. We're going to, we need to act now. We're going to lose the moment. They're going to go out of sight. Let's just do it. And then, we'll ask for, we'll make our apologies later, but we'll have done our job. And an argument went back and forth. I could hear the increasing intensity. Permission to engage. No, stand down. Do not engage. It turned out that they did not get permission. They did not engage, and it turned out that they had been looking at a unit of Israeli soldiers.
Wow.
And that had they not followed the process, they would have basically, committed friendly fire. And it would have been, a pretty bad situation. So, following the process, and this was something that I really felt, you're in a situation like that. You think to yourself, well, if today was my last day, what would I do differently? Mm-hmm. And you realize there's nothing to do different. You just got to do your job, follow the process. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the basis, the fundamental for everything. It's not sufficient to be great at something, or it's not sufficient to build a great company, but it's the basis, it's the foundation of any kind of organization. Do your job and follow the process. Once you've got that, you can start to innovate, get creative, and be thoughtful. But that's the basis of everything.
I mean, those are phenomenal stories, and I'm so grateful that you could share them. So you finish your time up in the military, and you decide you want to go to the political epicenter of the world, Washington, D.C. What was it like moving to Washington, D.C. and working at the U.S.-Israel Business Exchange?
So, just to take a step back. So after my military service, I worked in Israel Central Bank for a year. And then kind of started to, that international kind of bug kind of got a hold of me. And I wanted to move back to Washington, D.C., where I'd spent 6 months working on Capitol Hill and had a phenomenal experience and loved D.C. and had always loved the United States. So I moved to the US and was offered a position running the commercial section of the Embassy of Israel. So at the time, it was tremendous number of Israeli technology companies looking to provide different kinds of offerings into the US market. And our job was to basically help them orient into the market. After a year or so of doing that, I felt that we would be more effective outside the embassy, collaborating with the embassy, but outside. And I had enough connections in the local business community at the time to basically establish this U.S. Israel Business Exchange. We called it US IBEX, and raised money to establish it. And I moved from the embassy to run this as the executive director as a nonprofit business association, which I did for about 6 years. At a time that was absolutely fascinating. This was basically my business education. It was the dotcom boom. It was Y2K. It was the bioinformatics revolution, information technology companies, optical switching companies. We started to see, fascinating things happen and crazy deals getting done. Our job was to help companies design their market entry strategy, find venture capital funds, position themselves to win funding. And, it was this was basically the best business education I could have.
Do you have any major learning lessons from watching any of those Israeli companies go through the dot-com bubble?
Well, first of all, I think any time that you're trying to design your market entry strategy, you got to ask yourself a whole lot of really critical questions, like what are we solving for? What are we selling, but what is the market buying? What's the cost and consequence of them not buying my solutions or services? So there's a whole set of really kind of deep questions that you have to ask just in order to be in the game. And so we would talk those things through. We also helped organize events to introduce those companies to the market. And so these were really good kind of lessons about how you launch a business. And then I saw fascinating deals being done, kind of crazy deals. The first instant messaging system that AOL bought for $400 million, that their CFO later told us he would have spent $1 billion. They had $0 of revenue.
Zero. Okay.
And then about a year later, another company, an optical switching company, was bought by Lucent for about $4 billion, $0 of revenue. So when Chairman Greenspan at the time said, this is irrational exuberance, I kind of understood what he meant.
Right. And is that kind of what transitioned you being interested in the private sector and going to Columbia Business School?
Yeah, so we lived through the dotcom boom, and then we lived through the dotcom bust, and it was an interesting experience. And I realized that I was a non-profit entrepreneur, so I had all of the risk and none of the upside. So that didn't seem too smart to me. So it seemed like a good time to go back to business school, and I was fortunate to get into a program which was a joint program between Columbia Business School and the London Business School, and that just a fantastic group of people and great education.
And it was in Columbia when they first allowed you to travel to China. Is that right?
Yeah. So at the end of that program, all of us went out to China for a week, just kind of part of a study tour. But I ended up staying on for 4 months to write my final thesis about kind of companies entering the Chinese market. So I'd spent time working on how you enter the US market. I thought this would be an interesting project to run, and it was I picked a topic that I knew nothing about, which was cosmetics, and I would just do a lot of firsthand research and go up to people, in department stores and say, why are you picking that, lipstick, or what's so good about that makeup? And they probably thought I was a very, very strange foreigner. But it was a fantastic experience. I found people very gracious. Mm-hmm. And I was really interested in how emerging economies like China and India and others in Southeast Asia were engaging in the world economy, and we're going to be changing the dynamics of certain industries and business. And that was fascinating to me. And so when I got back from China, I got back to New York, I thought, I really wanted to be involved in a business that brought the United States and China together.
Well, one of the coolest, most random parts of the story is after Columbia, when you were looking for a job, you got into stand-up comedy. What got you into stand-up comedy?
Well, I finished business school, and I had a ton of student debt, and I was living on fumes and temping just to pay my rent. And I thought, well, I got to do something to keep sane. And so stand-up comedy seemed to be kind of the way that you poke fun at yourself, and it was good mental health kind of experience. And so I did a course at Caroline's Club and ended up performing, and then performing at a whole host of comedy clubs across New York City for beer and steak. And it was for about a whole month, I thought about making it a career. And then I got the opportunity to work at ReSourcePro, and realized very, very quickly that stand-up comedy was definitely not something I had anywhere near enough talent to do.
I can only imagine. I've never done it before. Did you have any moments where you were killing it and you got the entire crowd to laugh, or any moments where it was the opposite, where, you felt like you were bombing, or maybe there were boos or anything like that?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say that the reason I wanted to do it was because at the end of my business school program, I would just I'd make jokes in class, and my classmates would often erupt into laughter, and you become kind of addicted to that. It's like the best feeling. And so I had some good lines. I had a good routine that got me some good laughs, and really worked in New York. But unfortunately, I often got bored of my own material. And so I would change it. And then what got me a great laugh the first time would get me like barely a chuckle the next time. And then I also found that what works in New York City really doesn't work outside of New York City. So jokes that are really, anything goes in New York could be maybe politically incorrect or just not that funny. And so, I've really bombed as well. I bombed on my final line of a routine, and that's an experience when it's supposed to be the biggest draw and it's just staring into complete silence.
Oh man. I haven't done it, but I just watched a documentary on the Comedy Store in LA. And, it's interesting because you hear about even the most famous, well-known comedians like Jim Carrey, for example, about how they bombed and how it affected them. And really everyone bombs, it sounds like, as you're kind of, learning the ropes of comedy. But I mean, that's a super interesting footnote to your story. So you're doing comedy in New York City, and then you discover ReSourcePro. How did you discover ReSourcePro? Because weren't they based in China?
No, ReSourcePro is a New York-based company.
Got it. Okay.
They were the child of a managing general agency called Distinguished Programs Group. And at the time, it was founded because Distinguished Programs had a market with Kemper, and Kemper, got into trouble, went bankrupt, went out of business, and they realized they needed to move that market to a new carrier within about 3 months. And when they looked at their team, and they said, well, if we put other things to the side and we work nights and weekends, how long will it take us to do that? They realized it would take them about a year. And so they were in crisis and panic mode, and they had a former employee who had moved to China to teach English. And he happened to be visiting, and they said, and his name's Matt Bruno, and they said, Matt, could you come in and help us cancel and rewrite these 13,000 accounts? And he did that for several weeks, and then said, guys, I'm sorry, I'm going back to China. And they said, look, here's a laptop. Can you help us from there? He said, well, why don't I hire some smart English speaking college graduates, teach them the work, and see what we can do. And they were desperate enough to try anything. So they said, go for it. So he figured out how to connect remotely into their system. And within 3 months, the whole thing was done. And at that point, they said, here we are in New York. Office space is expensive. It's hard to find people. The people we have hate doing processing work. Why don't we tell each of our team members that you have an assistant who can take off your desk what you don't want to do? And we'll send that work to Matt and his team. And they started off with policy typing. And they took something that had a several-month backlog and got 90% of policies issued within 48 hours. So that's the point. They said, we have a business. And I came in about a year later. I saw an ad on the Columbia Business School careers website. I said, that's got my name on it. It's market entry. And happily they gave me the opportunity. And so initially I was doing sales and marketing, and then about a year later became CEO.
What an amazing pivot. First of all, I didn't know that about the ResourcePro story. And I also want to pause on your first year at ResourcePro, because I know there's a story in there where you were doing sales and marketing for the first 8 months and you hadn't seen any leads come in. And I can only imagine that you must have been getting, really nervous at this point. But in the next 4 months or so, you are so successful that the company decides to, the executives there decide to make you the CEO. Can you talk a little bit about that story and that transition in the first year?
Yeah. So I came into the insurance industry not knowing anything about insurance, and entering a startup company that had 4 clients, other MGA clients, that were kind of friends of our parent company, and 25 employees. And my job was to really figure out, what do we really have here? And why should people trust us? When you're doing, what we're doing is basically, our clients are delegating work that their service people or their underwriters are otherwise doing. And we're entering through Citrix into their system and working in their system as if we're an extension of their team. It's pretty intimate, and they have to trust that you can do the work, that you have the right security protocols in place, that your people who at that time were all in China, that they understand not just English but insurance, and that they can be kind of value-added team members. And so it took me a long time to really figure out not what we're selling, but what are people buying? What do people really need? And we were first to market. Yes, there was some outsourcing of work that's being done at the kind of the national carrier level, but for small and medium-sized insurance organizations at that time, nobody was doing this. And in 2005. It was really a time of high turnover of employees, people hopping from agency to agency. And so at the time, the only real solution was, well, we got to try and go find somebody, or we'll hire a temp. And both of those were very expensive, and they were, and they didn't necessarily solve the problem. And so if we could basically create a very stable, reliable, high quality service, then we basically solved their staffing challenge at about half the cost of what it would have cost, it would have been to them to employ someone, let alone go recruit them, which is also very expensive. And so I had to build an infrastructure around that story. I had to build a new website. I had to I want to videotape our existing clients to have them explain their experience so that future buyers could basically kind of see what someone else's experience had been to kind of relate it to their own challenges. And so, it took me about 8 months before I made my first sale. And quite frankly, my colleagues and the owners of the company were probably quite concerned. Is this guy gonna work out for us? And
right.
To their credit, they and to my fortune, they gave me a lot of rope to hang myself, or at least a lot of time to really figure it out. And so on the 8th month, I made my first sale, and then the sales started to come in, thick and fast, such that by the end of the year, we had my review, and they said, look, we were really worried about your strategy, but you've been vindicated. You were right, we were wrong, and we'd like to make you CEO. And so that's how it happened. And what then happened was that we saw that the kind of the challenges, the bottlenecks in the business, they just keep moving around. So it wasn't sales anymore. Then it was how many team leaders could we develop? Because it takes a year to develop a team leader. And when we solved that, It's how fast can we onboard clients, and it's constantly the challenges would evolve, and you just had to be agile enough to kind of flow with it.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. And I just want to remind the audience that ResourcePro now has over 6,000 employees, over 100 million in revenue, and you work with hundreds of clients. Do you guys work with clients just in the US or internationally?
Primarily the United States. 90%, 95% of our clients are US retail agencies, wholesale brokers, MGAs, insurance carriers, and TPAs. Mm-hmm. Almost exclusively P&C. And then we do have a few clients in the United Kingdom.
Okay. Got it.
Also, sorry, I should mention also in Canada.
Okay. Cool. COVID-19 was really interesting for ResourcePro because you have multiple centers in China. Can you talk about how the pandemic affected ResourcePro and how you got through the pandemic?
Yeah. At the end of January, I got a message from our business continuity team in China that was effectively, Houston, we have a problem. And what they relayed was that this virus had broken out in southern China, and that it seemed to be, spreading. And they were concerned because it was just before the Chinese national holiday, which is basically like Thanksgiving in the United States. People just go home and they visit their families. And we knew we had something like 3,500 of our then 4,500 employees about to disperse across the country. And so we realized we needed to figure out how we were going to make contact with them, try to get them back to the city as quickly as possible, and then figure out from there what were we going to do. And there was no blueprint for this at the time because this was kind of the front end of this whole experience. Nobody had any shutdowns. There was what do you do? And so we had a business continuity plan, but quite frankly, a pandemic hadn't been necessarily something that we'd run detailed scenario planning on. But what we realized was very quickly that we needed first principles. What's most important here? And the two principles that guided us were: number one, keep our employees safe, and number two, keep working for our clients. And so that kind of led us to a very quick decision, pretty much before anyone else had thought of doing this, which was we got to get our people in a work from home environment. Now, many of our employees did not have personal computers, so within 2 weeks we sourced about 3,500 computers and got them into our employees' homes. We also figured out a way to connect them to our office, and then from our office to our clients in a very secure way. We also communicated with every client to tell them exactly what was going on and make sure they were comfortable with what we were doing, explain exactly how we were connecting, what we were doing. And then to the extent that there was any drop in productivity, understand which activities were priorities for our clients. And then from then on, our employees were in daily communication with their point people. And so, while there was, maybe a short-term dip in productivity, our employees worked so hard and they understood that we had, our priority was their safety. And so when you show that faith in your employees, they give it back to their clients. And so there was very, very minimal impact or disruption to our clients. And it meant that we were able to get through, and very quickly after that, the Chinese government shut the whole country down, and we were already working and not affected by that. So I think that was very fortunate. And then we were lucky that experience served us very well when the pandemic both spread to the United States and to India, where we also have operations, and we were able to anticipate the same challenges and be a few steps ahead of it. And in life, sometimes you just need to be one or two steps ahead just to make do.
Just to make it happen. China's response to the pandemic was completely different from the United States. They completely shut down everything. And so how long were the employees at ResourcePro in China working from home? And then could they come back to the office after a certain amount of time? What was that time frame between working from home and coming back?
Yeah, so China is a very different country from the United States, and they have different constraints from what we have. What they were able to do was basically shut the entire country down for 6 weeks. And so, when you do that, the virus has nowhere really to go. And so that led to a very rapid reduction in cases. And they were also very aggressively contact tracing. Our employees would describe how they would, somebody would have had the infection, and then the news would say exactly where that person went on their commute to work, and if anyone else had been in the vicinity, they should go get tested. So They were very aggressive about that. But what it meant was, the whole thing kind of went down for us in February. By May, all our employees were back in the office, and that wasn't just like flick the switch, everybody comes back. We staggered it. We were sanitizing the office. We were paying for every employee to go into the office by taxi, so they wouldn't have to take public transportation. It was a very careful process, but by May, it was pretty much done.
That's awesome. And that's completely foreign to what a lot of people in the U.S. experienced during their remote work from home environments, obviously with the different regulation happening in different states. So that's so impressive, though, that you guys got it back up and running that quickly.
What's interesting is, and people don't realize this, but they had the same kind of PPE shortage at the beginning that we had. And so we were trying to source masks and things like that for our employees from India at the time. And then what happened was, when China got back up and running, our employees worked double time to get hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of PPE to our clients, to our employees, and to U.S. hospitals and nursing homes. So really, really proud of how our employees really came together to make a contribution here.
Well, congratulations. I'm glad that you guys were able to get through that so effectively. ResourcePro today, now that we're kind of moving out of the pandemic, just in general, in terms of how you see the future, what do you think separates ResourcePro from other competitors in the operations outsourcing space for the insurance industry?
Yeah, I can describe our journey. So, we started out, back in the day, in those early years, doing kind of classic staff augmentation. We'll do what you do. And we were really had incredible attention to detail, and we trained our people really well offshore so they could interact directly with our clients and be very flexible, adaptable, communicate at a very high level. As we took on more and more clients, we started to build a library of processes and tasks, which today is more than 17,000 different tasks that reflect all the different variations of work that we do across 400 plus insurance clients. And that enabled us to start seeing that the opportunity here was not really as a cost saving. It wasn't, I pay, my people $40 an hour, I pay your people, $15, $20 an hour. It was really about, for every hour I can get off my producer's desk or my senior account executive's desk or my underwriter's desk, at $15 to $20 an hour, I can support $200 to $400 of revenue an hour. That's a productivity play. And so what it required of us was to develop a deeper and deeper understanding of our clients' operations, the steps before and the steps after, so we could link tasks into complete functions and create more capacity, revenue capacity for our clients. It meant that we had to get better and better at understanding technology and data and probably most important, insurance knowledge. So that today we're increasingly having knowledge around insurance compliance and how you thread that into insurance processes, often more than our clients do. That we can be elevating our clients to perform their core mission better. So, in the case of our retail clients, their core mission is really about delivering really, best-in-class risk management services to their clients and delivering, peace of mind. And they can do that better if they can focus more on kind of responsive customer service, really excellent kind of insurance and risk management hygiene. And if they can get good training around that, and then they've got good processes behind the scenes to support them, particularly around quality, managing that post-buying process, making sure that not only has the policy been checked really effectively, and that's not just kind of field to field checking, but kind of field to paragraph understanding of that, and start to really understand whether there are exclusions that would deny somebody coverage that they thought they had, and as well as doing an effective review of any discrepancies that have come up, and being able to track that because if you could check a policy and have a list of discrepancies, but if you don't have a record of actually having reviewed it, made changes, endorsements, and there's, God forbid, there's a claim, the only thing you've got is the list of discrepancies, mm-hmm. and no evidence that you actually did a thorough review. So we create an entire environment around that for our clients that gives them peace of mind, that enables them to have much more transparency around that process, that enables them to map areas of risk, error-proof, give them data on where errors are coming from, whether it's from specific underwriters or specific carriers or specific lines of business or specific customer service representatives. And that integration of people, process, technology, and data combined with deep insurance knowledge is really how we're differentiating ourselves.
Well, thank you for breaking all that down. I was actually just talking to a producer the other day that was raving about ResourcePro's ability to aggregate all the policy information for a prospective insured, and then summarize it lightning fast and help set up like a proposal for the insured. And so, as I was kind of talking about this conversation we're going to have, I had a lot of people that were raving fans. I know we are a ResourcePro client as well. So if anybody is interested that's listening, I highly recommend reaching out to ResourcePro, because we have been dramatically more efficient since we have put them in play. Dan, I'm hoping we can wrap up with about five quick hit questions from our listeners. So ideally, these questions are answered in a sentence or less, quick, concise. Is that okay with you to wrap up the conversation?
Yeah, with pleasure. Hopefully that wasn't a suggestion. I have not been quick or concise the rest of the
No. I really appreciate the context and the detail, the background that you provided. And these questions are you'll find are more fun and probably explore the personal side of things more than the professional side of things. So to start off, what is your favorite restaurant in New York City?
The problem is so many great restaurants have closed during COVID. Like one of my favorite restaurants was a Danish restaurant called Asian, and it's in Grand Central. It was just across the street from our office.
Okay.
And used to take any guests we took to Asian, and it was quiet and Scandinavian cuisine, which is really fantastic and simple and good. But unfortunately, they closed down.
Oh, bummer.
Now that we're reopening our office in New York, I got to go discover some new replacements for it.
Okay, cool. I know we're going to lunch on Friday, so I'm looking forward to what we come up with there. All right, perfect. Best piece of advice for someone joining ResourcePro?
Yeah, so I think obviously the first piece of advice is learn your job, focus, learn your job. But what I always say, there are two other things that I say. Lift your head, pay attention to what's going on around you. There's an entire MBA in your business, in any business, that you can learn just by paying attention to what's going on around you. And so we like people to be thoughtful about their work, thoughtful about their environment, see how they fit into our business and how our business fits into the industry, because then I think they become much more value added. They learn, they understand how the pieces connect, what the significance of everything is. And the final thing I say is you got to have fun, because if you're not having fun, there's no point doing it.
It's a phenomenal response. I in our own business, when I look at all the things that are going on, and I know some people just get really focused in their day-to-day activities and they don't lift their head up, and there truly is an MBA that's going on around you. And, if you find those areas where you can add value to what's going on, man, it makes such a difference.
Yeah.
So, okay. Next question, go-to karaoke song. What would be your go-to karaoke song? Well, I have to admit, my wife is the karaoke queen.
I am the person who slinks to the back of the room and helps them. But if push comes to shove, I would almost every single time sing Rodeo by Garth Brooks, because secretly this little Welshman wants to be a cowboy.
All right. That's awesome. I wouldn't have expected that. Next question. What are your top 3 favorite books?
So probably the most influential business book that I've read is called Trusted Advisor by David Maister. And he talks about how you earn trust. Trust is not something that you should just expect. It's something that has to be earned over time. And he talks about kind of the mechanics of how you do that. And we've built a curriculum for our employees that's loosely based on those concepts. So that's the first. One of my favorite books of fiction is a book called Brother Fish by Bryce Courtney, which is about an Aussie soldier trying to make his way through the Korean War and then get back to society. And it's got these incredible stories that kind of weave their way through the book, including an unbelievable story about a young woman who finds herself in Shanghai in the 1930s and figures out how to survive, which is just gripping. And then probably since you've asked me for 3, I would just say any book I can read by the pool, which is something that almost never happens.
Really? Not with New York City's current heat?
Well, it's just finding the time to just sit down, relax, and read any fun book of fiction. That would be great.
Okay. Got it. And then final question, what are you most excited for this summer?
I think I'm most excited for international travel to open up. I'm supposed to be going to Oxford University for a course in August. I'm hoping that will happen. And of course, I can't wait to jump on a plane and visit our employees in India and in China and just be able to, give them a hug, and just reconnect on a personal level. We've had lots of Zoom calls, and they've been through a lot. We've been through a lot, and making those personal connections is really important.
International travel is something I'm looking forward to so much, with our capacity at Lloyd's, our partners there. I'm so excited for travel too. And I'm so excited that I can come out to New York this week and we can grab lunch in person.
Fantastic. I mean, I'm really looking forward to that too.
So cool. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on. I think everybody who listened benefited from hearing your story, the valuable lessons that you gained throughout your life and your career. And I'm super excited to see the next 5-10 years for ReSourcePro and how you guys continue to grow.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pat. I really enjoyed this, and it's just great to spend time with you.
Thanks, Dan. We'll talk soon. Today's podcast is sponsored by First Insurance Funding. First is a leading premium finance company in insurance and is known throughout the industry for their personalized service and quote flexibility. If you're tired of sending quote requests for smaller premiums to multiple companies, not leaving enough time to negotiate larger opportunities, then choose First as your primary financing source and experience the First difference today.